Good morning, dear viewers, and welcome to our channel Poetry Blows Our Blues Away. I am Mrinalini, daughter of Mrs. Mayuri Sridharacharya, and I am here to present to you a poem, The Earthen Goblet by Harindranath Chattopadhyaya. Shakespeare, in his rom-com As You Like It, says, "To see tongues in trees, books in running brooks, sermons in stones, and good in everything." The poets thus have an uncanny ability, the knack of speaking to even inanimate things. Interestingly, even the inanimate things respond to the questions posed by a poet. The poets are also very good listeners, and hence their communication becomes the best in the world. Harindranath Chattopadhyaya is the younger brother of Mrs. Sarojini Naidu. He is an awardee of Padma Bhushan. He was also an actor in Hindi movies, a lyricist, and a versatile writer. Now let us read together and enjoy ourselves with the poem written by him. The Earthen Goblet by Harindranath Chattopadhyaya. O silent goblet, red from head to heel, how did you feel when you were being twirled upon the potter's wheel? Before the potter gave you to the world, I felt a conscious impulse in my clay to break away from the great potter's hand that burned so warm. I felt a vast feeling of sorrow to be cast into my present form. Before that fatal hour that saw me captive on the potter's wheel and cast into his crimson goblet sleep, I used to feel the fragrant friendship of a little flower whose root was in my bosom, buried deep. The potter has drawn out the living breath of me and given me a form which is death of me. My past unshapely natural stage was best, with just one flower flaming through my breast. This is the poem, my friends. When I first read this poem, I was reminded of a sloka from the Bhagavad Gita. Ya nisa sarva bhutanam tasyam jagarti samyami yasyam jagrati bhutani sa nisa pasyato munehe. Krishna tells Arjuna that what the unenlightened person without any spiritual practice sees as light, pleasure and day, that verily is death for a seeker, for a spiritual aspirant. We now know what the goblet in this poem is. It's a spiritual seeker. It's an aspirant. See the beautiful situation into which the poem has been set by the poet. The poem was framed in an excellent situation. The poet asks the goblet, how did you feel when you were being twirled on the potter's wheel before the potter gave you to the world? This means the poet is questioning the goblet when it was being transformed. It's about its feelings when it was being transformed from a fistful of clay into an earthen goblet. The symbolism in this poem is the potter is God, and the wheel on which the pot is being twirled is the wheel of samsara, or the wheel of karma of an individual soul by which it is cast again and again into the world. And this earthen goblet is nothing but an individual soul. And hence the situation. The situation of this earthen goblet during its transformation is that of a baby in a mother's womb. It's said that a baby in a mother's womb has the knowledge, the recollections from past life. It has Brahmagyan. That's why Shankaracharya says, Punarapi jananam, punarapi maranam, punarapi janani jathare sayanam. The baby feels the pangs of pain because it's once again entering the world of misery and sorrow. Similar is the situation of this earthen goblet. The very first lines are ironic. O silent goblet, The poet addresses the goblet as silent, but it's not silent. It vents out all its woes. Maybe it was waiting for an empathetic listener to listen to its anguish. All the lines in the poem, the three stanzas, second, third and fourth stanzas in this poem are nothing but the catharsis of the earthen goblet. The poet became the empathetic listener by questioning the goblet about its feelings and emotions. So, the goblet is described as red from head to heel. The color red is also symbolic of the pain, the anguish and the anger of the goblet during its transformation. And the situation, the emotions of the goblet, the poet wants to know the emotions of the goblet during its transformation. Because once the child gets into the world, it gets carried away by the attachments of the world, by the pleasures, the fleeting pleasures offered by the world. Hence, I call this situation very apt. Then, after the poet poses this question to the goblet replies. It felt an impulse in its clay to break away from the great potter's hand. And it says the potter's hand burned so warm because it is very much reluctant to get into the world. It doesn't want that name and form. It's happy in its original form of clay. I felt a vast feeling of sorrow to be cast into my present form, it says. See the stark contrast in the view of the goblet when compared to our own views of the world. We find this, the pleasures of the world very great. We cannot do without them. We want them more and more. We want to acquire them. But the goblet feels just the opposite. It felt a vast feeling of sorrow on getting a form. Why? It's losing its original freedom. The freedom it has in its natural state of clay. Though beautiful paintings might be engraved on the goblet, it doesn't have the freedom that the clay has. It's still a slave in somebody else's hands. And it had the friendship of a little flower which was buried in its heart. Now that friendship is lost, the godly qualities which the clay has, like omnipresence, omnipotence and omniscience, are completely lost and destroyed when it gets transformed into a pot. And also the creative ability of clay is completely lost in a goblet. So it feels that it got a captive on the potter's wheel. This is the situation of an individual soul which is encased in a carnal frame. It is imprisoned in a body. When a soul or the real self is identified with the 5 elements of nature, it's ever free. As existence, consciousness, bliss, it is in its blissful state. It's bliss absolute and truth absolute. But once it gets a form, it's entangled in this world. This is the view presented by the goblet. It says, see the ominous words here. The potter has drawn out the living breath of me and given me a form which is death of me. And my past unshapely natural state. Unshapely natural state, does clay have a form? No, it's shapeless. Hence, it's described as unshapely. But it was a natural state of the goblet. That was best. That's what the goblet says. Because though shapeless, its freedom and creative ability are intact when it was in its clay form. So friends, this is the poem, but there are many inferences which can be drawn out of it. Just look at the villagers. They always feel that they look at the city life, the urban sections of the society in awe and admiration. But their own natural state, which is connected, their own state of life, which is more connected to the five elements of nature, is at its best. Though the goblet seems to use ominous words here, its message is very much life-giving. It asks the people to stay in their own natural state and not to hanker after the frills and fancies of the fast-pacing world. It asks us to still ourselves to the core of our being and to look within ourselves and to inquire what we really are. This is the message given by the goblet. So the villagers also are enjoying themselves, and life is in its best state. It's full of life in their lives rather than in the city lives. This is the message being given by the goblet. It's a very heart-rending poem, and it invokes the finer feelings of compassion within us. Finer feelings like compassion within us. And it stills us. That is the very purpose of poetry. And this poem has served the purpose to its zenith. Let's not dissect this poem further and spoil its pristine beauty. It's for the readers to put on their thinking caps and to draw out many other lessons from this poem. That's all for this session. Next time, my mother will come back to you with a more heart-rending, soul-stirring poem. Happy poetry reading.